Sarah was about to walk out of the bakery empty-handed after canceling her own son's birthday cake. Nobody said a word. Nobody stepped forward. It was as if that small moment of heartbreak didn't matter to anyone at all. But one man saw the whole thing happen, and he made a decision that would change far more than just that day. And before we continue, I want to wish you health and peace. Tell me, what country are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? That morning in Cincinnati started out like so many others for Michael Turner. Same quiet rhythm, same routine that over the years had become his refuge. After dropping his daughter Emma off at school, he walked a few blocks to Sweet Life Bakery, where he always ordered a coffee with cream and sat near the window. From there, he liked to watch people pass by, letting his eyes follow a stranger for a few seconds before he turned back to his cup. The smell of fresh bread filled the air, mixing with the low hum of conversation and the clink of spoons against ceramic mugs. It was a warm little place, always the same at this hour. Ever since his wife had passed away 4 years earlier, Michael had gotten into the habit of starting his day here. That short pause, that quiet 15 minutes, seemed to help him get his thoughts in order before the rest of the day came at him. But that morning, something broke the routine. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't an argument. It was something quieter than that, a shift in the air that made Michael look up from his coffee. A few feet from the counter, a woman stood, clutching her purse with both hands. She was dressed simply but neatly. Her shoulders were tight tense, like she'd been holding something in for far too long. On the counter in front of her sat a pink bakery box, taped shut, ready to go. Michael wasn't trying to listen. But the whole scene spoke for itself. The woman opened her wallet, pulled out a few bills, counted them once, then again her hands went still for a second, before she folded the money back into her purse. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I can't pay for it today." Diane, the woman behind the counter, shook her head gently as she lowered her voice. "Sarah, the cake's already made. It's got his name on it. I can't exactly sell it to somebody else." The name hung in the air between them for a moment. Sarah nodded, not arguing. "I understand. I really do. I'm sorry." She slid the box gently across the counter, not in one motion, but slowly, like she needed the extra few seconds. Her hand lingered on the lid for just a moment before she pulled it back. Michael looked down at his coffee, but he wasn't really seeing it anymore. He'd seen gestures like that before, small moments where someone lets go of something important without making a sound. Sarah turned and started walking toward the door. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't hesitating either. She was just moving forward, one step at a time, eyes straight ahead. As she passed Michael's table, she avoided looking at him, but he caught the moment her hand brushed her cheek, quick, like she was fixing something no one could see. The door swung open, letting in a rush of cool morning air. Outside, everything looked exactly the same. People chatting, someone laughing, shopping bags, quick footsteps on the sidewalk. Nobody seemed to notice what had just happened inside. Michael sat still for a few seconds, the cup between his hands. He didn't know a single thing about this woman, but the way she'd walked out felt strangely familiar to him. He glanced back toward the counter. The pink box was still sitting there exactly where it had been. Diane was straightening some papers, but every so often her eyes drifted to the cake. Michael took a small sip of his coffee, then set it down and didn't finish it. Some days come and go without much happening. Others turn on something almost too small to notice. Near the door, right by the frame, a small white envelope had fallen to the floor. Michael saw it. He sat there a second longer. Then he set his cup down, stood up slowly, and walked toward the entrance. The little envelope rested in Michael's hand as he stepped outside. For a moment he considered opening it, but when he looked up, he spotted the woman crossing the street with quick, purposeful steps, like she didn't want to stop for anything. "Man?" he called out, not raising his voice too much. She turned around right away. For a second she looked tense, on edge, until she saw it was only him. Her shoulders loosened just slightly. Michael walked over and held the envelope out to her. "This fell out of your bag." Sarah took it carefully, holding it with both hands. "Thank you," she said, trying to smile. Her fingers moved gently across the paper like she was making sure it was really there. Michael gave a small nod. "Have a good day." "You too." Neither of them said anything else. Sarah turned again and continued toward her car, an older sedan, the paint faded from years in the sun. Before getting in, she dug through her purse quickly as if double-checking she hadn't forgotten anything else. Michael stood there a moment longer watching, without any particular intention. Then he turned and walked back the way he'd come. Stepping back into the bakery, the atmosphere was the same as always, low conversation, the smell of warm bread, people coming and going. But his eyes went straight to the counter. The pink box was still sitting there right where it had been. Diane looked up when she saw him. "It's a shame," Michael said quietly. She nodded, stepping a little closer. "You know her?" Diane straightened a stack of napkins before answering. "Yeah. She used to come in with her husband years back. They always ordered something simple, but they never missed a birthday." She paused. "He passed almost 3 years ago. A car accident." Michael looked down, resting a hand on the edge of the counter. "Ever since then, everything's been harder for her," Diane continued. "She's working 2 jobs, barely has time to stop by anymore." She glanced at the cake. "She'd reserved this one weeks ago, told me she'd been saving up little by little." The silence that followed was short but heavy. "Her car broke down last night," Diane added. "Nothing serious, but enough to wipe out what she had left. And she needs that money just to get to work." Michael nodded slowly, like the explanation was finally clicking into place. He rested his palm near the box without touching it. From that angle, he could just make out the name written carefully across the frosting letters, shaped with real care and time. For a moment, he said nothing. He could have walked away, gone back to his own morning. It wouldn't have been the first time he'd seen something like this and let it go. His fingers tapped the wood of the counter once, then again, an almost automatic little gesture. Diane didn't say anything, she just watched him. Michael took a breath. It wasn't a hard decision, but it was a delicate one. He looked up. "So what happens to it now?" Diane shook her head. "I doubt we can sell it to anyone else." Michael glanced at the cake again, then toward the door like he was measuring the distance between the two. He stayed quiet a few seconds longer, then finally spoke. "I think that cake can still get to the person it was made for." Diane's eyebrows drew together slightly. "How?" Michael didn't answer right away. He looked at the box once more, then out at the street through the glass. He'd seen enough to understand how much this mattered. He turned back to Diane. "Let me help." She studied him carefully. Then she gave one condition. The silence that followed was shorter this time, and without quite knowing why, Michael had the feeling that this day was no longer going to follow the path it had started on that morning. Diane stayed quiet for a few seconds, watching Michael, like she was trying to understand exactly what he was about to do. She'd seen plenty of customers come and go over the years, but very few of them stopped like this, standing in front of something that wasn't even theirs to worry about. "What did you have in mind?" she finally asked. Michael didn't answer right away. He reached for his wallet, unhurried, and opened it. He went through the bills one at a time like he needed the extra few seconds before fully committing. Then he laid them on the counter, lining them up almost without realizing it. "I want to pay for the cake." Diane looked at him surprised. "For your daughter?" Michael shook his head. He glanced toward the box. "No." From that angle, the name was barely visible, but it was enough to know this wasn't just any order. He paused a moment longer. "But there's something important." Diane waited without interrupting. "She can't know it was me." Diane looked down at the money, then at the cake, and finally back up at him. "How do you want to handle it?" Michael rested a hand on the counter, tapping his fingers once like he was organizing the thought. "Maybe you could tell her it's part of some neighborhood program. Something that already exists. No explanations needed." Diane nodded slowly. "Got it." She didn't ask anything else. She picked up the cash and began ringing up the payment with calm, steady movements. I'll call her now. Michael tipped his head in thanks, but he didn't wait around. He grabbed his jacket and left before she'd even finished, like he didn't want to be there when it all came together. The air outside was mild. A car rolled by slowly. Someone was on the phone at the corner. A shop gate rattled down somewhere in the distance. Michael crossed the street and stopped beside his car. He didn't get in right away. He rested a hand on the roof, looking toward the bakery without staring directly at it. He shifted a little, angling himself so he wouldn't be so noticeable. A few minutes passed. He pulled out his phone, unlocked it, and put it away again without really looking at anything. A woman walked by with a grocery bag. A kid chased a soccer ball down the sidewalk. The light changed twice. Michael stayed right where he was. Then the bakery door opened. Sarah stepped out. She paused just past the threshold like she needed a second to get her bearings. She looked at the box, then back inside, then at the box again. She pulled it close against her chest, holding it with both hands. She walked to her car, carefully watching her step off the curb. When she reached it, she opened the passenger door and set the box inside, steadying it with her palms so it wouldn't shift. She stood there a moment looking in at it, then walked around and got behind the wheel. She closed the door. She didn't start the engine. Her hands rested on the steering wheel, one over the other. She stayed like that, completely still. Michael looked away out toward the street like he didn't want to intrude on the moment. He watched a man crossing at the light, the distant rumble of a bus, anything that wasn't the car in front of him. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw her move. Sarah brought a hand to her face and leaned forward. Her shoulders rose slightly and settled again. She made no sound, just that same small motion over and over, like she was trying to hold it all in. She rested her forehead against her hands of the wheel, disappearing between her arms. Michael swallowed and looked down. This wasn't something he was meant to see. He let a few more seconds pass. When he looked up again, Sarah was wiping her cheeks quickly with her sleeve. She took a breath, then another. She stayed still a moment longer, like she was making sure she was okay. Then she straightened up, adjusted the rearview mirror with a mechanical little motion, and turned the key. The engine started. She pulled out onto the road without hurrying and disappeared into traffic. Michael stayed where he was. He didn't move right away. He leaned back against his car and let his breath out slowly. Then he opened the door and got in behind the wheel. He rested his hands on the wheel in almost the exact same position he'd just watched her hold. He sat there a moment. Then he turned the key. The engine answered right away. He pulled out, merging into traffic with everyone else. He told himself it was over, that it had been a one-time thing with nowhere else to go. But that thought never quite settled because even though he couldn't explain it, something told him this wasn't the end of it. That night, Michael's apartment sat quiet, wrapped in the kind of calm that only shows up after a long day. Soft light from the street lamps drifted in through the living room window, laying gentle shadows across the furniture. Emma sat at the table doing her homework, hunched over her notebook, erasing carefully before writing again. Every so often, she'd glance up as if checking that her dad was still there. In the kitchen, Michael opened a drawer, closed it, moved a plate, set it back down in the same spot. He wasn't finishing anything. He stood still for a moment, one hand resting on the counter. Without meaning to, the morning kept replaying in his head. The woman at the counter. The way she'd pushed the box across, the car stopped in the street. He took a breath and moved again like that might shake the memory loose. "Dad," Anna said, not raising her voice much. "Can we drop off the food boxes today?" Michael took a second before answering. "I figured we'd do it Saturday." Emma set her pencil down. "But there are people who need it today, too." She didn't push it. She just looked back down at her notebook. Michael watched her for a few seconds from the kitchen. Then he dried his hands on a towel, even though they weren't wet. "All right," he said finally. "Let's go now." Emma smiled, just a little, like she'd already expected that answer. A little while later, they were heading down the stairs with a few boxes. Michael carried the heavier ones. Emma hugged the smaller one to her chest, adjusting her grip every time she leaned forward. The night air was cool, calmer than the morning had been. They loaded the boxes into the car without saying much. The community center was open like it usually was at this hour. Inside, things were busy but unhurried. People sorting food, writing down names, greeting each other like old friends. "Michael!" A woman named Linda called out from behind a table. "I thought you were coming this weekend." "We figured we'd get a head start," he said. Anna set her box down next to the others and quickly sat with two other kids to help sort smaller packages. They talked quietly, laughing now and then over nothing in particular. Michael set his boxes on a table and started organizing without needing to be told, moving cans, checking dates, lining things up carefully. The sound of the place was constant, bags rustling, footsteps, voices overlapping. "We've got a new family today," Linda mentioned, flipping through a notebook. Michael looked up. "Yeah. A young mom with a little boy," she said. "They're not having an easy time of it." She ran her finger down the page. "Her husband passed a few years back. She's been getting by however she can since." Michael went still for a second, a can in his hand. "Do you know where she lives?" he asked, trying to sound like it didn't matter much. Linda turned the notebook toward him. "Here you go." Michael leaned in, read the address, then read it again. It wasn't quite certainty, but something about it felt familiar. The street name, the number, like he'd seen it recently without really registering it. He stared a moment longer. "Everything okay?" Linda asked. Michael looked up. "Yeah, all good." He handed the notebook back and set the can down where it belonged. Even though it wasn't where he was headed, he drifted toward another table, but his mind wasn't really on what he was doing. A few feet away, Emma glanced over at him. Michael gave her a small, automatic wave, then went right back to thinking about the address, the bakery, the woman, the car parked on the street, and now this. He rubbed the back of his neck slowly. It could still be a coincidence. Nothing more. But it didn't quite feel that way. He leaned against the table for a second, breathing steady before moving again and going back to helping like everyone else. Still, every so often, his eyes drifted back to the closed notebook on Linda's table, like something had been left unfinished there. The next morning, the sun over Cincinnati lit up the fronts of the houses in a neighborhood Michael had decided to swing by before work. It wasn't the place he usually went, but the address from the night before hadn't left his head. Emma walked beside him, carrying a small bag of groceries. She didn't ask anything at first, just looked around, taking in the porches, the laundry hanging on lines, the open doors. "Are we going to see someone?" she finally asked. Michael nodded. "Yeah, someone who might need it." The streets were narrow, older houses lined up close together, flower pots on the windowsills. A radio played somewhere upstairs. Voices drifted from a porch, the clink of dishes carried from a nearby kitchen. They stopped in front of a door. Michael checked the number. It matched. He stood there for a second, bag in hand, hesitating. This didn't seem like the kind of place you just showed up at unannounced. Anna, though, had already stepped forward. "Here?" she asked. Michael gave a small nod. Before he could say anything else, she rang the bell. The sound echoed somewhere inside. Michael let out a slow breath like there was no turning back now. A few seconds passed, then the door opened. Sarah appeared in the doorway. They stared at each other. The recognition was immediate, but neither of them reacted right away. Sarah's eyebrows drew together slightly, like she was trying to place the exact moment she'd seen him before. "Good morning," Emma said, stepping forward easily. "We brought some food." Sarah looked down at the bag, then back up at them. "You didn't have to do that." She took half a step back, but not all the way. Not quite a no, but not a yes either. Michael raised the bag a little. "It's just from the neighborhood pickup," he said. "We had extra." There was a small silence. Sarah hesitated another second, looking at the bag, then at Michael, like she was weighing whether to accept. Finally, she stepped aside. "Come in." The apartment was small but well kept. Everything had its place, even if there wasn't much to spare. In the corner of the living room, a little boy sat playing with a handful of toy cars. When he saw them, he popped right up. "Hi," Emma said, walking over. "I'm Emma." "Ryan," he answered. They looked at each other for a second, and then Ryan held up one of the cars. "This one's the fastest." "Let's see," Emma said, crouching down beside him. Within a few seconds, they were both on the floor, pushing cars back and forth, laughing over nothing much at all. Ryan made exaggerated engine noises with his mouth. Emma tried to copy him without quite getting it right. Michael set the bag on the table. Sarah looked at it for a moment before opening it, setting the items out carefully. "I don't know how to thank you for this," she said. Michael shook his head. "You don't have to." "Still, thank you." Her voice was quiet but steadier than it had been before. From the floor, Ryan suddenly spoke up. "Yesterday I had the best cake." Emma looked up. "It was chocolate and had my name on it," he said, drawing a big shape in the air with his finger. "This big." Sarah went still for a second, a can in her hand. "It was a surprise," the boy added. Emma smiled. "I bet it was really good." Ryan nodded eagerly. Michael said nothing. Sarah set the can back down a little slower than she needed to. Then she looked up at him. She held his gaze for a few seconds. It wasn't quite a casual look. There was something more focused in it, more deliberate, like she was running something over in her head. Michael held her gaze for a moment, then let it drift toward the bag. "There was a lot of extra food this week," he said, like he was changing the subject. Sarah didn't respond right away, but she didn't push either. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, though it felt different somehow. On the floor, Emma and Ryan kept playing. They'd started a little race between the cars, marking an imaginary finish line on the rug. "I win," Ryan said. "No fair, you started early," Emma shot back. Their voices filled the room easily. When Michael and Emma said their goodbyes, Sarah walked them to the door. "Thank you," she said, and paused for a second. "Really?" Michael nodded. "Take care." Outside, Emma took her dad's hand. "I liked her," she said. He glanced down at her. "Me too." They walked a few steps in silence. Behind them, Sarah stood in the doorway. She didn't say anything else, but she didn't close the door right away either. The weekend arrived with a particular kind of calm, like the whole city had slowed its breathing. In a small neighborhood park, the trees offered shade to anyone looking for a quiet moment away from the everyday noise. Michael sat on a wooden bench, elbows on his knees, watching Emma run around with a few other kids. Her laugh carried clearly, light and easy. They'd come without much of a plan, just to spend some time outside. Michael had tossed an old soccer ball in the trunk just in case. Emma had joined the other kids without hesitation, staying close by like always. A figure appeared walking down the path. Michael recognized her before he'd even had time to think about it. Sarah was holding Ryan's hand, and he was hopping along beside her, looking around at everything. When she looked up and saw Michael, she stopped for a second. So did he. The recognition was immediate. Neither said anything at first, just looked at each other for a moment like they needed to confirm it wasn't a coincidence. Then she smiled, just slightly. "Morning." "Morning," Michael said, sitting up a little straighter. Ryan let go of his mom's hand the second he spotted Emma. "Hey!" he shouted, running toward her. Emma turned, recognized him, and held up the ball. "Want to play?" "Yeah!" Within seconds, they were running, kicking the ball back and forth, laughing every time someone missed. Sarah watched them for a moment. "He doesn't usually warm up to people that fast," she said quietly. Michael kept his eyes on the kids. "Emma doesn't either, honestly, but sometimes it just happens." Sarah nodded. She sat down on the bench, leaving a small gap between them. It wasn't awkward, but it wasn't close either. For a few seconds, neither spoke. The sound of the ball, the kids' voices, the wind moving through the trees filled the space instead. "These past few days have been different," Sarah said finally, not quite looking at him. Michael didn't answer right away. I got used to not expecting much, she added. You just do what you can, and that's it. She paused. But every so often something happens, and it changes the whole day. Michael looked down for a moment, resting his hands on his knees. Sometimes it doesn't take much, he said. He didn't add anything else. Sarah turned her head toward him, studying him like she was looking for something specific in his expression. She didn't mention the cake. She didn't ask any questions, but she didn't look away right away either. Michael noticed. He shifted slightly in his seat, settling back against the bench. In the distance, Ryan tripped over the ball and went down. Emma rushed over right away. You okay? Ryan nodded, laughing as he got back up with her help. He's always doing that, Sarah said, watching the scene. Thank you, she added quietly. She didn't explain further. Michael gave a small nod. You're welcome. The silence returned, but shorter this time. It's been a while since I felt like this, Sarah said. Calm. Michael didn't respond. He just looked ahead like he was searching for the right words and not quite finding them. The wind stirred the leaves gently. The light was starting to turn warmer. Sarah took a breath. She seemed to hesitate. Then she spoke. Would you want to grab a coffee sometime? The question hung there in the air. Michael didn't answer right away. He glanced toward the kids, then down at the ground. A beat passed, longer than usual. Yeah, he said finally. I'd like that. He didn't smile right away, but his voice was clear. Sarah nodded, not adding anything else. In the distance, Emma called out, Dad! Michael raised a hand to let her know he'd heard. They stayed there a few more minutes without needing to say much. The ball kept rolling back and forth. Ryan chased after it. Emma shouted for him to wait up. The park looked exactly the same as always. But something had shifted, even if it wasn't obvious from the outside. On that park bench, while the sun dipped lower and two kids laughed without a care in the world, something quiet, but real, had started to change in the lives of two people who never planned on any of it. It wasn't the cake. It wasn't even the chance meeting. It was that one small, quiet gesture that opened a door both of them had thought was closed for good. And now I'd love to know, did this story touch your heart? Type 11 in the comments. And if you feel like something could be improved or you'd like to share your thoughts, leave a 0 because every perspective matters. Just like in this story, we often think it takes big decisions to change a life. But the truth is, the simplest acts, when they come from the heart, carry a strength you'd never expect. Kindness without conditions can change the course of someone's life because everyone, no matter their past, deserves a second chance. A place to feel less alone. Like a light left on in a window through the night. A small gesture can guide someone through their darkest moments and remind them they're not alone. I've personally seen how one simple act of generosity can change someone's whole day and sometimes their whole life, even when it doesn't seem like it matters at the time. And even though this story has been adapted to carry a message, it reflects something very real. Happiness doesn't always come from receiving. Sometimes it comes from giving without expecting anything back. Maybe today's a good moment to pause for a second and think about those small decisions that can make a real difference in someone else's life or even in our own. And if this story found its way into your heart, I'd love for you to stick around because every story here is just a reminder that even in quiet moments, we can all be part of the change.